Good morning, Year 10. So I hope you've had a lovely half-term break and I hope you have had a nice rest. We are going back to poetry to look at the second half of the anthology. So what I'd like to know is how were the poems we studied before half-term connected to one another, and what is the connection between the poems in the second half of the anthology? Okay. Okay then, so what do you know about Cecil Day-Lewis? Mind map as much as you can remember. And what was the title of his poem, please? Okay, so in terms of what you need to remember then. So first of all, the poem is called Walking Away and it's written by Cecil Day-Lewis. So the poem was written as a tribute to Lewis's eldest son, Sean, so it perhaps shows how difficult it is to allow your firstborn to enter the big wide world and become independent. So we know that because this obviously was his eldest son, he'd never experienced a child growing up before, and therefore some of the things that he expresses and some of the feelings that he discusses, obviously it's the first time he's feeling them, so that's why he's written the poem. So the next thing I want you to have a think about then is using those inference skills again. So how does this picture link to the main quotation that we've discussed for the poem? And can you explode that quotation for me? So what do you know about it? What can you remember about it? Okay, so I'm hoping you've picked this quotation out, so like a satellite wrenched from its orbit. So the idea is that it's space imagery and a simile. So it compares the sun to a satellite that has been disrupted. The violent verb wrench could imply the father feels his son's childhood was snatched away from him without any warning. He's not comfortable with him growing up so soon. So we obviously spoke about the idea that a satellite and orbit, so they work together, don't they? They're consistent, and that's how this father and son have been. They've both needed each other. But when that satellite's been wrenched from its orbit, it's almost like the father is still following that routine and the son is now out of loop with it. So it's almost like they're orbiting at different times, and that's the idea of him growing up and not needing him any longer, and his father doesn't really know what to do with himself now. Okay? So I have to admit that the pictures for the structure is far more difficult than the pictures for the language. But let's see if you can get this one. So how does this picture relate to the poem's structure? So I was going for the picture in terms of form, as in regular, consistent. I'm not sure if you got that, but that's what I was going for anyway. So there's a regular rhyme scheme, A, B, A, C, A, and it uses a simple, often monosyllabic rhymes like day, play, away. And that lends itself to the melancholic tone to the poem, as the feelings are uncomplicated but raw. You could also think about them representing childhood and kind of the ease in which a parent is able to look after a child when they are a child, but when they become an adult, it becomes a little bit more complicated. In terms of structure then, it's the first person voice and the persona speaks directly to his child using the personal pronoun you, which gives the poem a very intimate and moving feel. So make sure that you've got all of those notes down. Revision is all about going back over this information, so it's really useful to make sure that you are keeping on writing it down, because the more you write it down, the more you're going to remember it. Next one then. So what do you remember about this young man, Charles Causley? Can you mind map as much as you can remember about him? And what was the title of his poem, please? So I'm hoping you've got Eden Rock down, and obviously it's written by Charles Causley. So Charles Causley's father died in 1924 in the First World War, and Causley was only 7 years old, so he was raised by his mother. And then he went on to care for his mother, who passed away, leaving him alone in the world. So we know that obviously he was quite a lonely gentleman. He didn't have many friends. He was very family orientated. But unfortunately, because he lost his father at such a young age, and then when his mother became ill, he essentially became her nurse, that often led to, him feeling quite lonely when both of them had passed away. So another little inference task. So here is an image that is related to the poem. Can you tell me which quotation it's linked to, and can you explain that quotation for me? I'm hoping that you've got takes on the light, and the idea is that he creates this angelic image of his mother, okay, showing how pure and good and precious she is again. It could also suggest a reference to heaven, how he wishes he could be with his parents. Could also reference the fact that obviously his mum is now in heaven and this is how he feels now he's left on earth alone. So there's lots to talk about in terms of takes on the light, okay? Again, another difficult one in terms of which image I could use to represent the poem's form. So see if you can have a think about how this picture might represent the form of the poem. So again, I went for that image because I think it recognised the repetition that is seen in this poem. So the form of this poem is that it's made up of 5 stanzas, mostly 4 lines long, and nearly every line has 10 syllables. So this regular structure reflects the steady nature of the narrator's relationship with his parents, and obviously that consistency that he felt when they were around. The final line, however, is separated from the rest of the stanza, so this could emphasise the narrator's current separation from his parents, or it could symbolise that he has crossed the stream and is looking at what is beyond. Obviously, this poem has quite a literal reading in the fact that he's lost his parents and he's missing them, but it also has kind of that metaphor of him seeing them and them inviting him to come and join him, them in heaven. So obviously, depending upon which reading you go for in your assessment, in your essay, would depend upon which one of these structure comments you would use. So how could you compare the poems that we've looked at in today's lesson then? What is it about them that's made me teach them together again?